Welcome everybody to this officials education session. My name is Darren Wender. I'm the head of coach and volunteer development with Little Athletics New South Wales. It is fantastic today to have one of New South Wales's most experienced officials, Janet Nixon, as our guest. Now, Janet has just recently returned from having been involved in her 5th Olympics in Tokyo. Welcome, Janet, and congratulations on another Olympic experience.
Thank you very much.
Now, we mentioned before this session start, we've had people using the chat box, their memories of the Sydney Olympics, because today is, of course, the anniversary, 21st anniversary since the opening ceremony of the Sydney Olympics. Now, Janet, was that, I believe you're involved in that Olympics, was that your first Olympics, and what are your memories of it?
So, yep, that was my very first Olympics. Well, yes, that was my first Olympics where I was attending. I always watched them before that. I remember the opening ceremony very vividly. It was a Friday, and 2 days beforehand, we were told that all the technical officials were able to get a ticket to the opening ceremony. And I was living in Geelong and I had 3 small children, and the competition didn't start till the 2nd week. So my plan had not been to go to the opening ceremony. But then when we were offered free tickets, I thought, well, you know what, it's the Olympics and you only get one shot at life. So I packed up my children, took them out of school, threw them in the car, drove they went to school on the Thursday. I drove that night, got halfway, drove the rest of the way on the Friday morning. We got to, my parents live in Sydney, and we got to Sydney and saw them, and we were able to go down the street and watch the torch go past. So all the kids got to see the torch go past. And then I went on into the stadium and got my tickets, and I watched the opening ceremony live. It was absolutely fantastic. It was one of the best experiences that I've ever had, and it was unexpected because 2 days earlier it was not part of the plan, and it was certainly not an easy thing to achieve, but I was really pleased that I did that.
And what comes to mind? What visions can you see in your mind? What immediately comes to mind of that opening ceremony or some of those experiences that you had there, Janet?
Well, the horses. There were horses, and they had some fantastic coats, and everybody wanted to swap their uniform. Towards the end of the Olympics, everybody wanted to swap their technical officials' uniform to get one of the coats from the opening ceremony. I never got one, but, I kept my uniform. So you win some, you lose some. But, I definitely remember the horses. And when they played the opening ceremony again last year when it was 20 years, and I sat there and watched it, which was the first time that I'd watched it in its entirety on a TV screen. It was quite different from the real life thing. Every other Olympics I've watched it on TV, but Sydney Olympics was very special.
So we've talked with, if we can just go back for a little while here. You've had all this experience as an official at the Olympics. How did you first get involved in officiating?
So I first got involved because I would run bits of paper around the track. So from the timekeepers to the results area, or from the start list, the ladies who wrote out the start lists and take them out to the starters or to the field events. I basically shuffled paper around and did the jobs that needed to be done. And then as I got older, if we needed extra athletes in a particular event to justify it being a competition, then I went out and ran the race, or I put a shot, or I did whatever. When somebody asked me to do something, I was pretty happy to do it. I enjoyed it. It was really good. Then I got asked to help out with the photo finish when I was at uni. And so that was like an individual invitation and approach because I had some skills and they were considered worthwhile. And that got me interested. I kind of knew the rules. It wasn't difficult to put that together, and it became quite enjoyable, helping people and doing something that I was good at. I certainly enjoyed doing things where I knew I was making a difference. I was getting positive feedback, and it was fun.
And how do you make that jump from, helping out and then getting on photo finish to then being at the Olympics? Janet, how does that happen?
Yep, that's a good question. And it's one that I continue to have to pinch myself to work out how that happened. Most of the time when I've been appointed to higher and higher levels, it's been a surprise. I just go along and do what I enjoy doing. I turn up on a Saturday and somebody says, hey, can you go and do the nationals? Then one day I got asked to be a chief at the nationals. Then the Olympics came along. For the Olympics in Sydney, yes, I put my hand up. I didn't really know what to expect. And then I certainly didn't expect to be appointed to photo finish, but I was appointed to photo finish and absolutely loved it, made the most of it. I was lucky because the Olympics came to my country, right place, right time. And so then to get to other Olympics, I essentially, it snowballed from there in that having done the Sydney Olympics as a photo finish judge, I was then a few years later invited to go on the international panel and to be appointed to the Athens Olympics. So I, once again, that was a surprise, but I took it. Then I was asked by, and so my journey has not been purely as a technical official. My journey has also involved some work as a contractor working for Omega. Omega have the contract to provide timing and results for the Olympics, amongst other things. And so they do all the sports. And because they'd seen me at the Sydney Olympics and also the Athens Olympics, they then invited me to be part of their contract team. They have a number of people who are full-time, and then they also have some contractors who come in when they need lots of people, such as the multi-sport events like the Olympics and the Commonwealth Games. And so I was given the opportunity to be a contractor, and I did a couple of meets with them, and then they invited me to do the Beijing Olympics. So I got my third Olympics in Beijing working for Omega. So I was still in photo finish. I was still assisting with deciding who wins and who doesn't win. And at the same time, I also got invited to do the Paralympics in Beijing. So I did the Olympics as Omega and I did the Paralympics with the IPC. And that was the first time that anybody had had an international photo finish judge for the Paralympics. And then London, my son was doing the HSC. And then Rio, once again, I worked with Omega. And then for Tokyo, I got invited to be a judge for, well, it was IAAF when they initially sent the email out, but it was World Athletics by the time we got there. So yeah, 5 Olympics, essentially all in the same room, slightly different roles, but essentially in the same area. Yeah, so that's how it happened. It kind of happened because right place, right time, and somebody asked me, would I be happy to do it? And the answer was generally, sure, prepared to take it on.
Let's talk a little bit about Tokyo, with it being the most recent experience, Janet. I'm sure people are very interested on your impressions on arriving, certainly with maybe the COVID situation and things like that. What can you tell us about your impressions on arriving in Tokyo?
Okay, so some of the backstory to going as, and so I imagine that most people watched the Olympics and got lots of stories from the media. As an Australian going to the Olympics, I had to apply to get out of the country because we have a ban on international travel. I applied and they rejected me and I went, fabulous. And then I sent an email to World Athletics and I said, can you give me something on your letterhead that says I need to be there, which they did. They responded within 24 hours. I resubmitted and within a few business hours, I got my ticket to get out of the country. So my flights changed 3 times leading up to it. And then with less than a business day to go, my return flight got cancelled completely. And so once again, I was calling for help and going, what happens? Brian Rowe, who is a Tasmanian technical official who most of you may well know or have heard of. I knew he had already had a lot of trouble getting back into Australia. So I immediately messaged him and I said, how did you get your flight back in? Because I'm now stranded in Tokyo. I hadn't left yet, but I would be. And he gave me names and numbers. I also had my own, they all matched up. And about a week later, so I was in Tokyo, but about a week later, I confirmed my flights home. So my one of my children in particular was very paranoid and very worried that I would not get to come home. It all worked out in the end. The AOC, so the Australian Olympic Committee, were absolutely wonderful. They helped and supported us all. We were not athletes, but and we didn't quite fall into the AOC group. So we weren't, for instance, entitled to a charter flight, but we were able to get help. And so, yeah, the AOC did a wonderful job in helping us get to the Olympics and get home and navigate the Australian government rules and regulations. Yeah, so my first impression of Tokyo was, oh my goodness, am I going to get there and will I get home again or will I get stuck? Will I be, will I catch COVID just because somebody sitting beside me has COVID? And end up in a hospital in Japan. So yeah, those sorts of stresses were definitely different from a normal Olympics. Just getting out of the country and getting back into the country were actually big stresses. And we didn't really know how it was going to work out till it happened.
I just thought of, and look, I do invite people at any time to write questions in the chat box if you'd like me to pass them on to Janet, if you'd like, to expand on anything that she has mentioned. The athletes go into a village. Janet, where do the officials go?
Okay, so the athletes do go to a village. This is true. And it's not big enough to accommodate the technical officials. It accommodates the team officials, but not the technical officials. So normally the technical officials are accommodated at some alternative accommodation. I mean, in Sydney, we were at Sydney University and we were in colleges there. When I was in Athens, it was kind of like a conference center and it was guarded by the army. And then this time was the best of all. We were in a hotel that was built especially for the Olympics, and it was across the road from the stadium, which is fantastic for me in particular, because although there's a crew of about 10 ITOs, international technical officials, I and I normally stay with them. I prefer not to travel with them, not because they're nasty or they're smelly or anything like that, but because they don't go at the same times that I go. So I want to be there comfortably more than an hour before the first event. And that's so I can do the zero test. And they don't always need to get there that early. So convincing people who are not getting enough sleep as it is, that they really need to get on a bus half an hour earlier is not all that much fun. So being across the road meant that we were all independent and we could just walk across the road whenever it suited us, which made it really good. So yeah, on this occasion in Tokyo, we were across the road. For the Paralympics, however, because there are fewer athletes, you get to stay in the village. And I've done 3 Paralympics as a technical official, and it's really good being able to stay in the village. You get to experience a lot of what the athletes experience, and it's pretty cool.
And do they organise officials' transport? Or do you got to find your own way there? How does that into the stadium? How does that work? Yeah,
normally, well, so if you've got to walk, you just walk. But normally, yes, there would be buses or normally buses for the Olympics. I've done a World Championships where I got a car. One of the TDs had a car for 2 different reasons, and he just gave me his car, so I got to go to the stadium by car. Which was pretty cool because then once again, I could work on my own timetable and I didn't have to, which was pretty lucky actually. The ITOs had a bus which seated 10 people and I wouldn't have fitted anyway. So sometimes I get a little bit sometimes I'm not in the main system and I just have to find my own way, but everybody knows I exist and you find a way.
A lot of people talked, Janet, what would it be like with no spectators there? And it was interesting because a lot of people were thinking, would athletes underperform, and it was really interesting watching because in the end, it didn't really, it was hard, I'm only watching by TV, it didn't seem to affect athlete performances too much. From an official's point of view, what was it like having no one in the stadium? Did it make much difference in the end?
Well, it did in a way, not so much. So I'm not a field official. I'm not out there in the middle of the stadium hearing the roar of the crowd. I work from a room and I have a headset on because I was listening to the radio, and so I don't really get to hear a lot of the crowd noise. But one of the things that I do normally hear in photo finish, and I use it to gauge a little bit how long it takes for the results to get to the scoreboard and the people, for everybody to know, so that I know if all the systems in between me and the scoreboard are working and how long they're taking, because there's delays in every step. And normally at an Olympics or a World Championships, you would hear the crowd roar when the first time goes up, or if, you know, there's a local athlete who came second or something like that, you'd hear a roar of the crowd, not for every single time going up, but just for some of the critical ones. And so if say there's a close one and we put up both of the times together for the close one, I would normally expect to hear a roar. And I didn't get that. So I didn't have that feedback as to whether the systems were working when we had close ones, where it's pretty important that we put the results out appropriately. And I wasn't getting that additional feedback. So what I ended up doing was I spoke to my friends and I said, well, so Helen, lives in Brisbane, so she's an Australian, she was there on the jury, and which means she sits there and does nothing. And so I asked her to give me a rundown, take photos, tell me what's happening. I wanted a complete rundown of exactly what was going on. I wanted it for the distance events to know how the intermediate times were going up, and also for the results. And I set her that task, and she dutifully took videos and photos and had a cheat sheet and told me exactly what had happened when. And that way I had a much better idea of what the presentation was. So I knew that our main audience was going to be TV, but that was my best indicator for it. So having no crowd meant that I didn't get that, and I had to rely on a friend on the jury. But the other thing that happened without a crowd was that there were no pop-up food stalls, and there was security there, but it wasn't nearly as anal as it might be. So because every single person on site had accreditation, everybody had the right to be somewhere. So we didn't need to have quite such diligent security guards stopping people from going up the stairs or turning this corner or going where they shouldn't have been, because actually everybody was at the stadium for a reason and they tended to do the right thing. We still prevented team managers from going outside their area, but they were allowed to go to the TIC and they were allowed to do certain things, and athletes were allowed to do certain things, but it wasn't very difficult to control them. Whereas normally we have to stop stray spectators who are not allowed to go to a whole lot of backstage areas, and they just didn't exist because they never got through the front gate. Which was kind of nice. I love having the spectators there, but it just made it a little bit easier to have no spectators in that sense.
Okay, now you've started talking a little bit about the photo finish room and a little bit about what happens in there. Now, Elizabeth has asked a question in the chat. How many people are there doing photo finish at any one time at the athletics?
How many people are in the photo finish room?
Yeah, how many people are there doing photo finish? I think that's what the question is asking. Yeah, I think.
Yep. Okay. So there's, in terms of technical officials, and I'm just looking for a photo that I can pull up to show you. I will just, I'm just going to share my screen. No, I've lost it.
And again, as Janet's looking for that photo, everybody, if you want to pop up any questions. Well, here we go. Yep, we can all see that, Janet.
Thank you. Okay, so there's a photo which shows on the left-hand side, there's me and my reader, Jamil. And we also had a Japanese judge. So I was the international judge. Jamil controlled the computer and the reading. Japanese judge did Hiroshi. He decided, left, right, whatever. But I was also in Jamil's in the other ear, and I would overrule anything. So in order to make it a three-way team, Jamil puts the cursor where he thinks it should be, Hiroshi corrects him, and then if he gives the okay and I don't say anything, that's it. And if I think it should be different, then I speak, and my word is final. But whenever I was happy with what they were doing, then I didn't need to say anything. And yeah, and it worked fairly smoothly. And we all knew which were the difficult ones. We all knew when the problems were, and we all looked at them carefully. We're all experienced photo finish judges in our own ways. And then on the other picture, you can still see Jamil, but obviously I wasn't in the photo because I took this photo. So just to run down, these two guys here were running the principal and the infill camera. And just to give you a sense of the international component, this guy here, who you can't see at all, is from Croatia. This one is from Switzerland. He's French-Swiss. Jamil is French-Swiss. Elisa is Italian, and she was taking photos that would go straight to TV. So as soon as we got the first three in and the times were decided, she would do a photo which would go to TV. So occasionally on TV, you will have seen the photo finish image go up. She was responsible for that. Next to her is Annie. She was doing the backup camera. Then Ollie was controlling on-field display boards. Alish was, Annie is from Hong Kong. Ollie, I don't know where he's from. I think he was German. Alish is from Slovenia, and he controlled when we could start the race by making sure that all the cameras were ready and the trackside clocks. Greg is French. He was the boss of the Omega guys. We had Server, who was a Russian-born German, and I can't remember that guy's name. They were dealing with the transponders. And Danya here was sitting next to me. She took the results and made sure that they went through to the results system and the scoreboard. So after we had finished the results, I would tell her that she had them. I would wait for an okay from the track referee and from the video referee, and I would give her a thumbs up. Then she tells her people, it goes official. At that point, TV can show the full result and it's available for everybody. And then after she printed it out, I checked the printout, I gave her another thumbs up, and then it was really official. We never actually quite worked out what was the difference between the first official and the second official. It's just in the protocol and we had to do it. And yeah, that was kind of annoying, but you know, some things you just can't get around. They work out the rules and regulations before, and it doesn't matter. Like, I've done this a number of times and I keep suggesting they change the rules and it never happens. So, you know, you just work within what you have to work within.
That team you're in the room with, Janet, do you know them before? Have you worked with people before? Are there people you've maybe never met before? Or, you know, how does that work?
I think I knew half of that team. So some of them were brand new to me. But yeah, I knew half of them.
Okay.
And I know them well enough. So there was one guy who wasn't in the room, but he was downstairs. And at the end, he came to me and he figured that I would have power or control or sway. And he said he really would like a relay baton. And I was like, well, I haven't seen any relay batons being given out, so I don't know. But I did know somebody who has a collection of relay batons, as in from a number of different events. And so I went to him and I said, he was an international, he was a competition director, in fact, but he's from England. And I went to him and I said, do you know anything about relay batons? And he said, actually, I have a box, but there aren't enough for everybody, so don't tell anyone. So I went back to the Omega guy and I said, what's it worth to you? Will you give your shirt off your back? And in the end, we negotiated a deal and he gave his shirt off his back in order to get a relay baton, and I coordinated a relay baton. So I know some of these guys well enough for them to come to me and ask for special favors. And when I can help them out, I help them out. And although at the time I said I didn't need a relay baton, on the very last night when we were walking away, my competition director guy, he had a box. It was half empty because he'd given them away very secretly to very special people. And we're going down in the lift, and he said, there was a small number of us in the lift, and he said, I've still got some left. And at that point I said, yes, please. So I have a relay baton from Tokyo, and so does one Omega guy, and he's one shirt down.
It's interesting. The vibe in you know, everybody's experienced obviously in that role coming into the Olympics. Is it cool and calm and collected? Is there any times it gets a bit sort of stressful, or what's it like in there, Janet?
It's cool, calm and collected. Yeah, we're there to do the job, and it is so yeah, knowing the rules and knowing how it works, and knowing things like a pole vault takes a lot longer to warm up than a shot put, knowing that, you know, we want to do things slightly differently from what you might do at a state championships or a Saturday meet. Knowing those sorts of things is kind of par for the course. Knowing English is par for the course. Everybody must speak English. And so once we get there, those sorts of things are just accepted. And the fact that it's the Olympics and we've got TV is just accepted. And there's a reasonably low turnover. So as I said, of the Omega guys, half of them I've worked with before, and I've worked with them plenty of times. And so enough of the team has done it before, and that makes a big difference. So yes, it is calm. Yes, it is controlled. Yeah, you don't get probably the biggest problem. And I'm just trying, in Beijing, we had some Chinese volunteers who were in our room, and I don't even know what they were doing, but they got very, very excited when the Chinese athletes were doing well. Also in Athens, we had, there were some Greeks who did extraordinarily well. The women's 400 meter hurdles was won by a Greek, and she'd like come out of nowhere, and she was a huge sensation within Greece. And the volunteers got really excited, and they're the ones who actually didn't have the experience prior to their first home Olympics. And I mean, for my first home Olympics, it was exciting for me too. And then as you do more, you realize that it's kind of serious, and you can't get excited about your own country and your own athletes. You do a job, and that's the way it works. And I guess it helps that we're, in my room anyway, we're from a whole lot of different countries. I confess that when Nicola McDermott cleared 2:02, and there was no track event at the time, and I'd been watching it because fortunately Denya, who sits beside me, she had a CIS, so I was able to, when, you know, and by that time of the competition, it's not track events constantly, we have gaps. And so we were watching the high jump. I think there was a German, but she didn't do so well. Anyway, I was watching, I knew exactly what the story was, and then I watched her live jumping the 2:02, and I did let out a little squeal. Somebody turned around and looked at me because it was kind of unusual for me to squeal at anything, but I was very excited. And I knew that I was free to watch it because I had, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes before my next event when I had to concentrate again. So yeah, you stay very calm when you have to. And yes, it's okay to be excited. I also stand up whenever there's a national anthem, whenever there's an Australian national anthem. If it's another country, I sit down so you can't be seen by the crowd. But if it's an Australian one, I stand up, and the guys around me will see that I'm standing up, and they listen out and they go, oh, okay, it's your anthem. So we kind of respect each other, but yeah, you stay very calm.
And there's a few questions coming in via the chat box, and I apologise to people if I'm not keeping up or don't get to them all. But there's a few about the general Tokyo experience. Susan's asked what the food was like over there. Janet, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You know, traditional Japanese food, variety of food. What was it like over there?
Yeah, no. The food. So breakfast was a standard international. You know, I don't know what it was, a 4 or 5 star hotel or something with a buffet of a variety of food. There was, you know, there was no Wheat Bix, but there was what you would normally expect to get in a breakfast. The exception being that we walked in the room, we had our temperature taken, we had to sanitize our hands, and then we had to put a pair of gloves on and a mask on. Well, you had to wear a mask if you left your room anyway. Already had a mask on, had to put a pair of gloves on, and then we got a little something that was to put our mask on when we sat down. So you'd go to the buffet, you'd get your food, You'd go find a table, you'd sit there, you had a Perspex mask up between you and anybody else who might be sitting at the same table so that you wouldn't catch COVID from each other. And then if you wanted to go back to the buffet, like to get another cup of coffee or something, you had to glove up and mask up again in order to go back. So we all kind of learnt you just get everything the first time, because it's a real pain putting those gloves on. They were just really, really not good gloves. And the food, so the food for breakfast was fairly standard, normal stuff, and you could have a choice of Japanese or otherwise. And the food in the stadium where we got lunch and dinner was exactly the same for lunch and dinner for 9 days. It was, there was no butter chicken, there was no hot anything, there were sandwiches, there was salad, there were yogurts, there were beautiful cakes, and there was fruit. And it was perfectly adequate. It was very fresh. It was not cooked, reheated, frozen, whatever. It was fresh. It was good for you. And if you wanted it, you could eat it. And if you didn't, you could still eat it. And you could always order Uber back to in your hotel. You couldn't go anywhere else. We were in quarantine in Tokyo. The first 14 days you're in quarantine. We're only allowed to go to the hotel and the stadium. And I was only there for 12 nights. So I never got out of quarantine in Tokyo.
Now, Janet, Chris asks, did you feel welcomed by, how were you welcomed by the locals, particularly with the media hype that a lot of Japanese population didn't want the games?
Yeah, a lot of the Brazilians didn't want the games 5 years ago either. A lot of the Athens didn't want the games then, and you couldn't tell about the Chinese in Beijing. But no, because the people who were there wanted to be there. And I only went from one bubble to another bubble. Everybody who was there wanted to be there. So yeah, it was very welcoming. The Japanese were fabulous. They were very welcoming. They wanted it to happen. They were enthusiastic. They did their very best. Yeah, it was fantastic. Yeah.
Okay. Now there are a couple of questions about the Paralympics, but you just did the Olympics this time around, Janet. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Yes. So, actually, here's an interesting question from Sue. Are athletes or team managers, Janet, allowed to view photo images if the decision is close?
Yes, they are, definitely. So it's quite standard that we make the photo finish images available in the TIC. So that exactly for that reason, so that they can go see it. We also make the times to 1,000th of a second available very quickly so that they can see that. In fact, yeah, we only had 2 formal queries that came to photo finish, and I don't believe either of them. There was one, the first one was a legitimate query that I think it was a case of 2 athletes with the same time to 100th of a second. And only one of them went through to the next round, and it was a women's race and it was a sprint, but I can't quite remember. It might have been a 200, like heats to semis or something like that. And we expected that to be a query because it's a kind of standard type of thing for a team manager to do. And they didn't query. And then I heard in the break from the secretary of the jury that there was a query, and I said, like, their time's up, what are they querying for? And she said, well, you know, there was a muck up. And I was like, okay, fine, but I'd already anticipated it, so I had a hard copy of it, and we agreed to meet at a particular time at the TIC. And I met the Jamaicans, and they were lovely, and they asked questions, and they wore double masks, not quite sure why. And I said, do you want the piece of paper? Because, like, you know, whatever, I'm not fussed, you can have it, you can go away and satisfy your athletes. A fairly standard thing to do. And they were grateful and they were happy and they went away. And then about 3 days later, I was told, and there was no query, we'd stayed in the room for our 30-minute protest time. And then I got told that there was a query on a particular event, and it was late in the week, by which time everybody is tired. We're doing morning and evening sessions, but you don't quite get enough sleep overnight, so you tend to go to sleep in the in-between bit. And the Omega team had all gone, and I knew that they'd gone because I told them, time's up, you're allowed to go. And then I got told that there was a query and could we show it? And I said, okay. And I found one of the Omega guys, and he radioed to someone else and actually woke up one of the Omega guys in order to get him to come back and show the photo. And it was the Jamaican team managers who I'd seen earlier in the week. And it wasn't a very close one at all. And it really didn't justify it. It was outside the time. And then at the end of after I explained to them why their girl didn't get to wherever she was meant to go, like the next round or whatever, and they said, oh, could we have a copy? And I went, okay, that explains it entirely. They just wanted a hard copy and they'd played us. And I apologized sincerely to the Omega guy who I had woken up. But like it, you know, we did the right thing. We had to do that. It was unfortunate that we were duped inappropriately, but you know, that happens.
Now there were a couple of questions submitted in advance of this session when people registered, and they actually reflect a couple of the questions in the chat box. I'll try and group them a bit together here. What improvements have you seen in photo finish technology since your appointment to Sydney compared to Tokyo?
Yeah, okay, so the big difference, because I've always done photo finish, and so focusing on the photo finish, the biggest difference has been the cameras. The cameras are better. They're just giving really nice photos. I mean, they were giving really nice photos 21 years ago too, but they've gotten better and better. And Omega actually released new cameras for, like, at the Olympics. It's a marketing concept. And yeah, the cameras are just really nice. They're much better than they were 21 years ago. From my perspective, the software's changed and it's better than it was 21 years ago too. So yeah, those improvements, they're happening all the time, but you notice it when you compare one Olympics to another Olympics.
And another question that came in prior to the session, did you see any really clever systems or processes in Tokyo that we could adopt at Athletics New South Wales events?
Well, yes. So one of the things that happened, and I don't know how much you'll all remember, but on the very first night, there was a 4x4 relay. It was a mixed relay and it wasn't necessarily done as brilliantly as it might have been. A 4x4 is actually quite a challenging thing to do. And the Japanese technical officials were all a little bit shy and not quite willing to speak up. And there were issues quite unrelated to all of that, but I'm not going there. Anyway, with the relays, one of the things that you need to do is call the order as they cross the 200-meter point in order to get the athletes in the right order at the finish line for the legs 3 and 4. And this is traditionally done really badly. And Tokyo was no different. And having it on the first day is really challenging. Anyway, we kind of worked with it. And in the end, what they were doing was the video referee, who had 80 cameras at his disposal. He was on a radio to the track referee. I was on the same radio. He was actually watching what was going on at the 200-meter point, and he was calling the order through to the track referee at the finish line. And so therefore, he was doing it over a radio where we were all speaking English, and it was very clear. And then everybody, the competition director, photo finish, video referee, everybody, and track referee, and any of the ITOs who were on the track also heard what that order was, and we all knew what was going on, and that worked really well. So I would certainly, that is one thing we could do if we had a video referee or even a live stream. That is a really useful thing to do, to make use of the technology that we have and make life just that little bit easier on our relay days. But a lot of the other stuff we did at the Olympics, we do really well in New South Wales.
Oh, it's good to hear. A question from Diane, did you just have to set up the equipment and check it every day? I
have to check it every day, yes. So the equipment gets set up once, and there was a lot of stress with that. At the Olympics, they have an opening ceremony and they just make such a mess. And then they were meant to have, so our last night of track competition was Saturday, and the IOC, or the organising committee, I can't remember which one, wanted to hold the bronze medal soccer game, football game, at the main stadium on the Saturday morning. And that would be a serious pain everywhere, to absolutely everybody. We have to clear the entire field, including the infield camera, and then set it all up again in like a 2 to 3 hour period. It's a logistic nightmare, and it was really not necessary. And is it happening? Is it not happening? Is it happening? Is it not happening? That was going on all week. And it wasn't finally confirmed till, I think, Friday night. before the Saturday. So we had to plan for shut everything down and hope that we didn't have to shut everything down. And it turned out that our wishes were received, or whatever. It worked out our way. So we didn't have to pack everything up. But yes, we have to check the equipment every day, and we do.
You talked a little bit about quarantining before, Janet, and how was that for you? You know, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I was very well supported. I had lots of people talking to me and responding to me. I also work from home. So I just worked from home from the hotel room. It was seriously not a problem. I knew it was going to happen. I went prepared. I had all sorts of cables. I got there and my TV didn't quite do what I wanted. So I rang up the reception. They sent me another TV. It turned out it wasn't the TV at all. It was a remote control. And so I then had 2 TVs plus my 2 laptops. I had HDMI cables, DVI cables, and VGA cables and power board and extension cables. So I set myself up the way I wanted to, and I had a lovely time. My daughter thinks I was living the dream in quarantine because, you know, food came to the door and I didn't have to talk to anyone. But it was really good to have the support. And yeah, I didn't actually see face-to-face anybody. Yeah, but my son, who had been terrified about me not getting back from Tokyo, he works about 3 blocks down from where I was, and he rode his bike down to see me and waved at me. Once he had seen me, he was fine and he never wanted to see me again. So, you know, he was seriously worried when I wouldn't come back. And then he was very, very happy once he was actually able to see me, instead of just talking on messages and phones, which I could have still been in Tokyo. So once he knew I was really home, that was very good. So yeah, quarantine was a blast.
Okay, we've had some great questions come through the chat box, and there is still time to pop some things in there, everybody. A really interesting question from Neil. Did the heavy rain have any effect on the photo finish process and the cameras, Janet?
No. So it heavily rained only really one night when there were women's 400 hurdles on. In fact, I think we had hurdles and high jump and discus that night from memory. Or maybe it was a pole vault. No, it was a pole vault, not a high jump. And it was really only one night that there was heavy rain. And no, the equipment is meant to withstand that. What we did have, we had the grass got watered. Yeah, and that was a problem. The grass got watered, and the local organising committee couldn't, or the venue management couldn't tell us when it was going to be watered, or, you know, yeah, there were a lot of, in the very beginning, we had problems with the watering scheme, and it was not feasible to bag the camera and protect it in that way. And in the end, we negotiated a deal and they didn't water around the camera. And part of that was wrapped up with the soccer too. Like if they were going to play soccer, they wanted to have all the grass looking beautiful. Whereas if they just had athletics, and the bits under the camera and around the camera were going to be just fine for the athletics, and afterwards it would look a bit messy, but we weren't fussed about that. So yeah, watering the grass was a problem. The rain itself was not, I don't believe that caused us any issues. It caused the athletes some issues and the start referee some issues, but not us.
Maybe just a related question there. Chris has just asked, were there any times that the backup cameras were required?
The principal camera never failed, if that's what you mean. The infill camera never failed. Okay. But we did use the backup camera because there's a requirement that we provide the 4x4 splits. And certainly early on, we did that using the backup camera. So we recorded everything on the backup camera and we did the splits on the backup camera. But then later in the week, when we had the single sex 4x4s, we did all of those just on the main systems. We read the main race, did the job we were there for, and then did the splits after that, which meant that, of course, as the very last event is always a 4x4, and everybody wants to pack up and we're still sitting there doing 4x4 splits, but, you know, you have to do it.
Look, we've got time for a couple more questions here.
Sure.
COVID, you talked a little bit about the COVID situation in the breakfast dining room. What about at the events? Let's see, Susan's asked, what COVID procedures did officials have to undertake every time to attend an event? Did you have daily temperature checks, QR codes, all that type of stuff, COVID testing? What was the situation there, Janet?
We had we had to have 2 negatives before leaving Australia. We had to have a negative at the airport. So we were told that it would take up to 7 hours to get from the airport to the accommodation when we arrived. And in fact, on my flight, the air hostess was fantastic. She came to me, and like the flights had, 20 people on them. And she came to me before I got off and she said, "Would you like a snack?" And I said, "Oh, I'm okay." And she said, "No, you've got a long time to wait at the airport, have a snack." And she like forced a massive amount of snacks on me, which was really good. So I had a whole bunch of snacks that and I didn't really need them. I just sort of gradually ate them during the time I was at the Olympics. But yeah, so there was a long wait at the airport while we went through all of the COVID procedures. And then we did, so temperature checks every time you go in or out of the hotel, every time you go in or out of the stadium, and if you go to breakfast. Yeah, and we did a daily spit test, a saliva test. So you got used to it. You just get up in the morning, you spit in a tube, stick a barcode on it, register it on your app. You had to have a mobile, a smartphone in order to deal with all the apps. You got a message if you didn't. You had to check in also and say that you were healthy in a 10-question survey that was the same 10 questions. So you kind of got it by the end. And if you didn't do that before about 11:30, they sent you a text message and told you that you had to do it. And other than that, wearing masks. I wore a mask all the time, and most of the people in my room did too. And as I expected, because I wore a mask, when people came over towards me, they did, if they didn't already have their mask up, they put it up. So they respected my standards. And the fact that Australia and New Zealand were well known throughout the world that we have different standards in terms of COVID, that our infection rate is a lot lower. I think people respected that, and so kind of also expected us to have slightly different standards. For the most part, most people wore their mask most of the time. But I must admit that when we didn't, for photos occasionally, or even when we had to eat, I did tend to stick with the Oceania crowd just because I knew that they came from the same background COVID-wise. And once again, I did not want to get stuck in a Japanese hospital. I wanted to come home.
We might have one more question about
Sure.
Tokyo, because I know we want to just chat very quickly about some other things too, Janet, but it's last question in the chat box. Apart from Nicola, you spoke about Nicola before, were there any stressful and or memorable moments for you?
From these Olympics?
Yeah. Oh, well.
Yeah.
Happy for you to discuss what comes to mind.
I think, yeah, I think it was all memorable. It was all exciting. Nicola was kind of the one time when it burst out of me. My job is to stay calm and to do the job. And yes, there were stressful times, and I mean, there were good times. Yeah, I don't think they were too stressful. I think there wasn't anything that we couldn't deal with. And yeah, a lot of the friendships are very memorable. When you're working shoulder to shoulder and it is stressful, but you have to get through it. Yeah, you just have to do it. And I think when you work shoulder to shoulder with people in the tough times, you form really strong friendships. And so it's always really nice to go back and see these people. There was one of the ITOs from Brazil who I met in Athens. It was it was his first Olympics and my first international. And we befriended each other in Athens, and he was there again. He was a TD this time. And because whenever I see him, it's a high level competition and you're working hard to make sure everything goes right, make sure you've covered your bases, cover everybody else's back. We are always happy to see each other again. And that goes for a lot of others too. It's just that he was one of the early ones that I met overseas. And yeah, I think that when you're working in tough conditions, you remember each other and you look after each other and you have each other's back, because we all want the same thing. We all want it to work.
Thank you for the insight. That's absolutely fantastic, fascinating. Brisbane Olympics, Janet. Brisbane Olympics, what an opportunity. Any officials who have what should officials be doing now if they've got their eye on that Brisbane Olympics? What advice would you give them?
Fantastic question. Yes, so I've been to 5 Olympics. There is absolutely, the Olympics is the ultimate in sport, and a home Olympics is the best thing ever. You cannot top a home Olympics. I actually moved to London soon after the 2012 Olympics. Sorry, I moved to Scotland soon after the 2012 Olympics, and they were all abuzz. Because they just had their home Olympics. And I thought, wow, why are you guys so excited about it? It wasn't that great from my perspective. And then I remembered the Sydney Olympics and I went, yeah, it's a home Olympics. And a home Olympics is like nothing else in your life. It's the best thing ever. This year in Tokyo, there were 500,000 accreditations handed out across the sport. So that's what Peter Hamilton, who works for ATOS, was saying the other night. There are lots and lots of ways to be a part of the Olympics. So some of those people are technical officials. Some of them are sport-specific volunteers. We have more sport-specific volunteers than technical officials, and I think there are normally about 200 technical officials. There are event presentation, event management, security, media. There are so many roles that are needed at the Olympics. Some of them are paid, some of them are volunteer. When it comes to it, it really doesn't matter. You're all working towards the same goal to make it work, and you're all doing your part, and everybody has a part to play. It's the best thing ever. And when it comes to something like the Olympics, knowing the rules, knowing the sport, understanding how it works on a day-to-day basis and what the athletes need to do their best, that's kind of the bread and butter. You just need to know those things. And so, yeah, 11 years will go really quickly. And anybody who wants to be there, come out to athletics, have a go, enjoy it, break a pit, do whatever you have to, you know, put the bar back up on the high jump. It's really fun. Enjoy it, encourage others. Even teaching others. You might not actually go to the Olympics, but you might be able to say, yes, I taught that person everything they know. You know, I taught them how to do that. I've got people who I know, who I still keep in contact with, who say, yep, I knew Janet when she was just a little girl. And yeah, whatever part you have to play, whether you're there or whether you're supporting others who are there, it's just the best thing ever.
Do you have a number one tip for an official just starting out? You know, if you're talking to someone who's just getting into officiating, do you have any, you know, what would your big piece of advice be to them?
Yeah, okay. So having said that, Olympics is really fantastic. I suggest, I think doing stuff just because you want to go to the Olympics is maybe not the best way, but to do it because you enjoy it. Knowing that the Olympics is coming up in 11 years, but if you don't enjoy what you're doing, it's not going to be any fun. So just enjoy it and enjoy having other people around you and encourage other people and share the love and just go out and do what you can. And as a volunteer, you know, the other really good thing, as a volunteer, you don't have to go. And just remember, if you don't feel like going, don't go. You're a volunteer. And I am always conscious of that. I go and I know that I'm a volunteer and I know that I go because I want to go. And that always puts me in a good mood. So yeah, just enjoy it. That's all I say.
Finally, what's coming up next for you in officiating, Janet? Where do you see yourself heading next with officiating?
Well, we're in COVID lockdown. I'm guessing we'll be out in maybe a month or so. Talk to Gladys. But I guess you mean internationally, and I don't have anything. There are no appointments in my schedule. I just like, by the way, I don't apply for these. I just do my job and then sometimes I get another email. And at the moment I don't have another email and I'm okay with that. I'm pretty happy that I've had a good innings and I don't have any emails.
Well, Janet, look, thank you so much for your time this evening. It seriously has been absolutely fascinating getting an inside look at the officiating. It's been so wonderful having you on this officials education session and really appreciate your time and all the best going forward.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Janet.